Welcome, comadres and friends. Pardon me. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. The leadership team and I are so pleased that you can join us for tonight's teleconference, and we're beginning our 17th year. It's been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these 17 years, and we look forward to many more years to come. Would also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit. And tonight, please help us welcome authors Cristina Henriquez and Emanuel Xavier or Emanuel Xavier. I had to learn how to pronounce it correctly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please remember to keep yourselves on mute because we are taping. You can keep your videos on, and we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, but if you want to see everybody else, gallery works as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. But first, let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Maria.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Ferrer, and I am the Executive Director of Las Comadres para las Americas. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York City. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started these teleconferences in October 2006. We are in our 17th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and the book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about our Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book clubs in your city or time zone. We have 12 clubs in 12 cities. There is sure to be one that fits your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, please help us start one. For more information about our book club, please visit us at latinolit.com. Please invite others to join us as well. Comadre Tess.
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our July 2024 Zoom teleconference. I'm Tess Tobin, project manager for the book club. I've been a proud member of the book club since 2007 and enjoy promoting and reading Latine authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our interviews tonight begin with Cristina Henriquez, the author of The Great Divide, The Book of Unknown Americans, The World in Half, and Come Together, Fall Apart, a novella and stories. She has been long listed for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and was a finalist for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Interviewing Cristina is Comadre Laura Esparta, who is currently the Executive Director of A3 Art Alliance Austin, the city's first nonprofit local art agency, facilitating a re-granting program for local artists, musicians, and performers. She retired after 17 years as the division manager of the city's 12 museums and cultural centers under the City of Austin's Parks and Recreation Department. In 1994, she received the NEA TCG Directors Fellowship, a national honor given to only 4 theater directors in the nation every other year. Take it away, Comadre Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Tess. And hello, Cristina. I'm so pleased to meet you. I want to express how much I loved your book, as much for the great language as for the marvelous characters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this gift.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, we'd like to start out today asking you to give our listeners a brief synopsis of the book for those who haven't started it yet.
Yeah, it's always so hard to boil down a novel into just a little synopsis. And let me start by just thanking everybody who made it possible for me to come here and do this. I'm really happy to be able to do it. Yeah, this book is, the synopsis essentially is that it's about, well, the very short line is it's about the humanity behind the Panama Canal. So I wanted to take this kind of monumental moment in history, the building of the Panama Canal, which happens just after the turn of the century in Panama. And I wanted to take that moment, and instead of looking at it from an engineering perspective or a geopolitical perspective, which is the way that that story is usually told, I really wanted to know, what was it like to live through the time when the Panama Canal is being built? And so I ended up with all of these characters from all of these different perspectives and from all of these different places who all kind of come to Panama at one time and in some way are connected to the construction of the canal. So you have a 16-year-old girl named Ada Bunting. She comes from Barbados to Panama to earn money for her sister back at home who needs a surgery that her family can't afford. She ends up meeting a young boy named Omar, who has been born in Panama, raised in Panama, has spent his whole life there, but has had a very kind of lonely existence just with his father. And when the canal project starts happening, he thinks to himself, oh, there's all of these people here, in my country. And he wants to desperately to be a part of something. So he goes and joins the canal efforts, much to the dismay of his own father, who really sees the canal in a very different light than Omar does. That becomes a source of tension throughout the book. And then kind of the other main storyline is about this American couple who comes to Panama. The husband is a malaria researcher, and he comes with his wife, and he's hoping to eradicate malaria the same way that has been done for yellow fever. And you see that sort of play out over the course of the book. And he interacts with Ada and then with Omar, and everything starts to kind of weave together. And hopefully by the end, you have a sense of kind of this whole picture of, again, what life was like during that time.
Yeah. Wow. And so many more characters enter the picture and share their stories too. I understand that you grew up in the States, but went back regularly to Panama. How did those trips connect you to your family and your family history?
Yeah.
And did your family play a role in the canal?
Yeah, so my dad is from Panama, and he came here when he was like 18 years old to go to college. He thought he would get his degree and go back, and he ended up staying. All of his family was still in Panama. And so by the time I was born, my parents really made it a priority to take me and eventually my brother and my sister, all of us, to Panama pretty much every year since I was 8 months old. We've been going there and visiting. And, we'd stay with my grandparents or with my aunt and hang out with cousins. And, we have a big party when we get there, and, opening of the suitcases and giving everybody all of their gifts and all of the, like, I have all these really warm, rich memories from going to Panama. And I still try to go now with my kids. It's just a place that when I get there and I walk out the doors of the airport, my hair gets like frizzy and crazy and everything. But I also just have this feeling in my soul that's like, like this is a place that I'm so connected to, and I don't know, I think writing this book was then a way to further connect with my heritage, with my roots, with my family. I have family members now who work on the canal, and halfway through writing this book, my dad, who knew what I was working on all of that time, suddenly said to me, I used to work on the canal. Of course, he's too young to have worked there during the construction era, but he was after high school, I guess, he had gotten a summer job, like in the dredging department, doing canal work. I think it's almost impossible to live in Panama, to grow up in Panama, and not have the canal touch you in some way. But to my knowledge, I don't think any of my family worked on the construction of it. So,
Did any of your family members play a role in building this book?
oh, yes. Yes. My dad was my unpaid research assistant. Every time I came across something that I couldn't find online, or I just needed extra help for, either I would go to the librarians who were instrumental in helping me, or I would go to my dad. And my dad then would, write me back an email with all these links, or he would have, before I know it, he would have called someone in Panama, some agency, to get the answer to some, very arcane question that I needed to know to get this detail just right. So he was helping me all along the way. And I, really am so grateful for that and couldn't have done it without him. But I mean, and in Panama, my cousin would be like running around making photocopies of the draft to take to somebody who was going to read it for me. And yeah, it was a family effort.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Your novel has such an interesting structure. It was kind of like watching an Altman film, It was hard to tell who the protagonist was because you went into such depth with each of your characters. That was fascinating because it seemed to me that there were numerous points of view working in parallel to one another. What was the significance of this approach and how did it come about?
Yeah, I didn't really care too much whether there was one character who kind of rose up and acted as the protagonist. I was much more interested in this chorus of voices and chorus of perspectives, frankly, and figuring out how I could get as deep as possible into each one of those. And, I wrote this whole book by hand in notebooks, and every once in a while I would stop and I would write myself like instructions kind of. And one of my instructions to myself was, everyone gets a heartbeat. Meaning, like, it didn't really matter to me how minor the character was or how briefly they would appear. There are characters who really only show up for like one paragraph, but you get inside their head for that one paragraph. And that was just really important to me, partly because, again, I was so aware that the way that the story of the canal is told is from like one perspective only. And that perspective is usually from the United States. And I just thought, if I'm going to write this book about this moment in history, I really want to fill out that story. I want to make it feel much more complete than it has ever felt to me when I'm doing research or when I'm learning anything about the canal. And that to me meant that I had to tell it from as many perspectives as possible. And I had to do that as deeply as I could. So that was always sort of the mission and the project as I was working.
Mm-hmm. So how did your main characters come about? How were they born?
The first characters who came to me were Ada and Omar, who I mentioned. And really, I wrote an entire draft that just focused on the two of them. And I thought I was done. I was like, oh, I finished the novel. This is great. And then I showed it to my editor at the time, and she read it and she had one note for me, which was, it has to be bigger. And I thought, okay, so either it can be longer, like the time, right now it takes place over just a few months. And I thought, okay, I can elongate the time frame of the novel, or I could add more characters and see what happens. And the latter was just much more interesting to me, partly for the reasons that I just enumerated. But I had Omar and I had a mention of his father. So the next character after Ada and Omar, I thought, well, who is his father? I need to figure out who this guy is and what role he kind of plays. And from that, the character of Francisco was born. And Francisco is a fisherman in Panama who, again, is sort of very wary of the fact of the canal. He really sees it as a point of division within the country, whereas it's really being sold as something that's going to unite the world and be of great benefit to Panamanians. And he's not so sure about that. So I started just trying to figure out who is Francisco. And from there, it was like, well, who is Omar's mother, and who's Ada's mother, and just kind of kept branching out. And it was like endlessly unfolding around me. And the thing then was like trying to rein it in, it was like, who actually belongs in this story? And how far do I let it go? But it was really fun doing that, I will tell you, like just not so much sitting down to tell a story, but sitting down to find the story, and to have the kind of patience and intimacy with the characters that I was just letting them reveal themselves to me. And I think, yeah, that act of discovery as a writer is always something that's really, really fun as you're doing it.
It was fun for us too.
Yeah, yeah, I hope it comes through that it's like organic, you know, that I'm not behind the scenes so much pushing everybody around and manipulating and being authoritative so much as like letting them speak to me, letting them breathe, letting them act, and then sort of following them wherever they would lead.
Mhm. I understand that the genesis of this book was a process of over 15 years. What was that journey like? Was it like building the Panama Canal?
A little bit, a little bit. There were times where I had to do so much research. I was like digging, and it occurred to me that just like the men who were standing knee deep in the mud every day, you know, digging out the clay and the dirt, like I was in that same kind of process of excavation. Yeah, I mean, I had the idea for this book like 15 years before I put pen to paper. And it really, the idea was just absolutely simple and totally vague, which was essentially just, I would love to write a novel about the Panama Canal. And I was actually like amazed that there weren't more sort of major novels about the canal and major movies about the canal. Like it's just such a narrative event in a lot of ways. And it's the, you know, there's so many forces of the world that are all kind of coalescing at this one time in this one place. And I found it just absolutely fascinating. And I just thought there's a novel here somewhere if I can figure out how to get at it. So the figuring out how to get at it was the hard part, right? Like I had the idea, but then I didn't know what to do with that idea for a really long time. So I was just walking around in my life. I wrote another book in the meantime, and I just had carried that idea around with me all of those years, thinking like one day I'll write my Panama Canal novel. And then I was just really stuck with a different book actually that I was trying to work on, and it was going nowhere, and I was sort of spinning my wheels. And after a long conversation with my agent, I sort of put that down, and I thought the only other idea I actually have right now at all is this stinking Panama Canal novel. And like, is it time? Like maybe I can actually do it. And so I just threw myself into reading, researching, seeing what kind of avenues that would light up in my mind, what it would spark, and taking lots of really messy, disordered notes. And then eventually I started seeing it like come into being. I could understand, you know, the context of the whole thing, and then just starting to see these characters in specific scenarios and doing all of these things that they end up doing in the novel. And I just started writing scenes, and then it was another 5 years of work before I actually had a full draft that I was happy with. But yeah, that was more or less the process.
It sounds like the process of making a sculpture
Mm.
and discovering the sculpture inside the rock.
Ah, yeah.
The richness of character, language, and historical narrative compete for our attention in this book. Which element is most important to you in your writing?
I think character first. You know, sometimes I get really smitten with the language. I pay a lot of attention to the language, especially the rhythm of language. Like I can start to hear it in my mind. If I can't hear it, that's not a good sign. So when I start to hear it, sometimes though I'll like be wordy on purpose, or I'll like want to include a phrase just because it goes with the rhythm. And then I always have to stop myself and ask, does this actually belong to the character? Like, would the character say that thing? Does the character care about that thing? And if the answer is no, then it has to come out. So I'm always in deference to character first, I think. But I am very taken with language. I love reading poetry. I love, like, the books that I love to read sometimes are not super plot heavy, but they're very stylistically imbued with like beautiful language. Yeah, that's all. I love that though.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. So how does your family feel about the book now that it's published?
Well, it comes out in Spanish in August. So I'm very excited about that because then I'll be able to share it with my family in Panama. And I'm eager to hear what they think of it because I really thought of this book as like my love letter to Panama and to Panamanians. You know, they're so often written out of the story of the Panama Canal. They're just completely overlooked. And I really wanted to put them back in the center of that story. And so I'm very eager to hear what they think of it. And I'm excited to know that it will be in Spanish for, other readers too. But, I don't know, I think my own family, I mean, they're super supportive. They've read it. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully
Well,
they're telling all their friends about it, doing all of the things that I would hope they're doing.
I'm sure it'll have an impact in Panama when it arrives. It'll be interesting to see how they receive the book. How do Panamanians feel about the canal now?
I think, it's hard to generalize, but I would say that my sense is that overall Panamanians are very proud of their role in the canal now. So for a long time, for much of the century, from the time the canal was finished in 1914 until the year 2000, and in the year 2000 is when the canal got changed over, the control went to the Panamanians. Until that moment, it had been in the hands of the United States. And for all that time of that century, I think there was a feeling that Panamanians were outside of it, right? That they were kept apart from that story and from part of their own country, frankly, right? I mean, that was an area through the middle of the country that was carved out for the United States for the purposes of the canal. But, my dad can tell stories about trying to cross from one side of Panama to the other and having to stop at a checkpoint and show an ID to walk through his own country. And so I think there was a source of pain for a long time. But when the canal got turned over to Panamanians, I think, and they've been running it now for the past 24 years, and they've been running it beautifully well. I think there's a real sense of, pride and ownership over what it's become.
Yeah. Well, I think they'll be proud of this book as well.
I hope so.
What are you working on now?
Oh, gosh. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, I have a few short stories that are sitting around that I'm kind of trying to make progress on, but I'm doing a lot of reading. And I have a vague idea for something. It's sort of, this is always how, it's same thing. It's like I have a vague idea and then I need it to crackle before I can commit to sitting down and working on it. It takes 5 years in my case to write a book on average. So it's like, it has to be something I feel really strongly about. And so I'm waiting to see if it kind of comes to life a little bit more. But until then, I'm just doing a lot of reading, which I'm enjoying because when I'm working, when I'm writing, it's sometimes hard for me to read everything that I want to read.
Yeah, I see. The title of the book, The Great Divide, the moment I saw the title, I had to flash on, what's happening in the US right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's an election year.
Mm-hmm.
And I am, immediately think, oh, yeah, we have our own great divide to contend with. What kinds of parallels would you imagine between the Great Divide in Panama and the Great Divide in the US?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the original title, my working title as I was writing the book was The Great Cut. Because that's what they called the portion of the canal, the Culebra Cut, where most of the book takes place. And so, the guys in the novel just keep saying the cut, I'm down in the cut, and I had called it that in my own mind. And then, with talking to the publisher, we went through that, there was some back and forth about whether that was the best title. And they asked me, they said, what other titles do you possibly have? And I had been writing down potential titles all along. And so The Great Divide was another option. And I just thought it worked well for the book because, you know, the canal itself is this division in the middle of the country, but also there's lots of other kind of metaphorical divides, and there's all these relationship divisions that you see kind of come to light throughout the course of the book. I don't know. I mean, I think in terms of relevance to today, I mean, one of the interesting things that I learned about the canal is how many people came from other places to come try to help build it and to try to work on it. And so then you had all of these people trying to coexist in one place, like lots of different cultures, lots of different races. And, you know, my previous book was a book ostensibly about immigrants. And I had gone into this one thinking, oh, I'm writing a totally different book, right? And then my husband pointed out to me at some point, he's like, no, actually, you're kind of writing the same book, you know, or it's treading some of the same territory, at least in terms of thinking about how do people kind of come together and live together and exist together and work together and all of those things. And so I think that to me is probably something that is still relevant today and will speak to a modern reader trying to think through some of those things. But yeah. I mean, you're not, other people have said to me, they've said, you know, I've said, which, you know, the name of my book is The Great Divide. And they've said, oh, is it nonfiction about like today?
Is it about the
No,
election?
actually not, no.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. Good luck with your book and your book
Thank you.
tour, and hope to see you at some of the many book festivals that you're appearing across the U.S. Kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
All right, thank you. Tess?
Thank you, Cristina and Laura. That was wonderful. Our second interview tonight is with Emanuel Xavier, author of the poetry books Pierre Queen, Americano, If Jesus Were Gay, Nefarious, and Radiance, Selected Poems of Emanuel Xavier, and Lovely Child, shortlisted for 2024 Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry. He is recipient of a New York City Council citation and a Gay City Impact Award for his many contributions to New York City arts culture. He is on the board of the Publishing Triangle. Interviewing Emanuel is Comadre Nilda Diepa, the author of Alborada Dawn, a cross-cultural memoir in poetry, and winner of a Royal Palms Award from the Florida Writers Association. A member of Florida State Poets Association, Florida Writers Association, and the International Society of Latino Authors, Nilda is vice president of both the Florida Writers Foundation and the Orlando Arts Poets. Take it away, Comadre Nilda.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to get to know this Emanuel and to hear more about what his work is. Being old enough to be your mother, I want to congratulate you on all the personal and professional accomplishments you have achieved in a relatively short period of time. Your strength of character, your empathy, talent, your emotional intelligence, and perseverance have really served you and your community well. And thank you also for using all your experiences, good and bad, to give hope to others in similar situations that otherwise would not have positive role models to encourage them. Your beautiful and honest poetry serves to educate and enrich the lives of all of us that have the privilege to enjoy it, either as spoken word or on the page. Oh my God, your book cover, that face is striking, it pulls you in. Was the cover based on you, and how did you come up with the title?
Well, the cover was loosely based on me. I worked with this artist from Albuquerque, Timothy Cummings, that I met down in New Orleans, and his artwork is very similar in style to what was selected as the final cover, but we worked together to sort of make it a little bit more Latino, a little bit more me, a little bit more, you know, um, capturing the essence of the poetry in the book. And the title, Lovely Child, if you notice the words LY are in parentheses because it could be read as love child or lovely child, because those are the two things that, you know, I sort of speak to through the poems included in this book.
Mhm. It's a beautiful introduction to the beautiful poetry inside. As a cis Puerto Rican poet whose poetry has a lot to do with my lived experience, I was recently derogatorily accused of writing a confessional work. And that painful and shocking experience helped me to relate to you when you mentioned on an interview, I was dubbed a street poet. It was meant to undermine my work as I had no formal education or credentials as a writer. And since I have little or no formal education or credentials as a writer myself, I am often paralyzed by imposter syndrome. So how and where do you find the courage to write and keep writing, even when people look through you or dismiss you?
Well, I mean, I think they were calling me a street poet because they saw a lot of, and I hark back to poets like, you know, Miguel Piñero, who, you know, was out on the streets doing, you know, nefarious activities. You know, I was kicked out when I was 16, so for being gay. So I learned to survive on my own, doing things that, you know, were ungodly or, you know, not anything that any kid should have to go through. So when I started working at a bookstore, I noticed I started reading the books and I was really inspired by a lot of the poetry that I was reading, but I noticed that there weren't a lot of poems that reflected my own personal experiences. And at the same time, I discovered the New Eurekan Poets Cafe and I fell in love with spoken word poetry. And I realized that poetry was not just what I had learned like in high school. It wasn't just necessarily Shakespeare or Sylvia Plath. It could be something that could open this world to others, that poetry was for everyone. I had an experience at the Piers where I briefly encountered Basquiat, you know, before he passed. And, you know, later on when I discovered his work, I was like, yeah, you know, I like art is for everyone. It's not just for the elite. And that was my inspiration for writing the poetry and writing confessional poetry, you know, because there are different types of poems, there are different types of poets. And who's to say which is best, you know? Of course, yes, I took some workshops and, you know, I did what I can to become more of a part in academia, but, you know, the essence of my own writing is just, you know, sharing my stories, my personal stories, because there might be somebody at the time when I was writing like in 1997, you know, there weren't a lot of books out there and about our experiences. And I wanted to reach that kid out in the Midwest who maybe felt alone, like they were the only, you know, Latino or the only gay person in their town, wherever they live, and let them know that we're out there, that we're everywhere.
So you have mentioned that you had an experience of a hate crime that affected you both physically and emotionally. And I wonder if it impacted on a declaration that I saw online where you said, yeah, you would like to be remembered as someone who dared pursue his passion despite many hardships and all the challenges faced making that dream come true. My work may not be the most prolific or profound, but it is a genuine voice representing many queer Latinx stories. Our experiences may be unique, but if you read between the lines, we share universal truth. And I was wondering, how did that experience of hate affect your work and your commitment to support like LGBTQ plus people of color?
Well, I think from the very beginning, I was trying to give voice to two very distinct communities that I was part of, and this incident happened like in 2006. So I had already published, a couple of poetry books, and I was already on the scene, and that sort of really affected me because the time that I was out on the streets, I had been, for the most part, safe. But then, I was already like an established writer, sort of coming into my own. And I had this incident happen in Bushwick where I was attacked by like, 16 to 20 teens. And, because of that, I'm deaf in this ear. And I have like, I had, they discovered like an acoustic neuroma, which had to be removed. And, but I survived that. And I guess that sort of was like a second lease in life. And it symbolized the importance of what I was doing and the reason why I was writing and sharing my stories and trying to reach a wider audience. We're very limited as poets. Like I don't have an agent. I've always published through a small independent press. And, so, it's that much more of a challenge for us to sort of get our work out there as poets and reach a larger, wider community. But yes, that incident definitely was an opportunity for me to grow and to be stronger in what I was doing.
Wow. Sounds like a big deal. In your poem Vile, you state that it felt quite appropriate to be vile. That was how the unwanted survive. And in the introduction to your novel / memoir, Christ-like, not the hyphenated Christ-like, but Christ-like. It's interesting. About you write that sometimes not caring is the only way to survive. Was not caring as a survival tactic what allowed you to accept being vile? What was the turning point that turned you from the streets, from hustling towards a better life? And how did you go back from the dark to the light?
Well, when I was about 25 years old, I realized if I kept in the direction that I was going, I was going to be dead. And at the time, I lost a lot of my friends to AIDS and to violence and to drug addiction. And I felt like I needed to do something to change my world, to change my life. And that's also one of the reasons that I started writing, because I didn't know how much longer I would be on this earth. And I wanted to share these stories. And when I like Vile was about, that poem was about, all the anger that I had to overcome, because, growing up gay, you're taught that, you're going to go to hell, that you're evil, that you're unwanted. And that was enforced by the fact that, I had been abandoned as a child by my father, and that, my mom kicked me out when I was 16 because I was gay. And just, you embrace the darkness because that's what you think, you are meant to be. That's all there is. And until you discover that no, it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be self-destructive. And, I don't have regret for any of the things that I did, because regret is self-destructive. But I learned from that, and being able to be honest with myself and with my audience through my poetry has really been impactful, because it teaches other people that, we're in a much better place. We're in a much better world. We still have a long way to go. There's still violence towards trans people and queer people within our community, but we've definitely come a very long way. But we needed, more voices like myself and everything in order to be able to get to that point, to show people that, we're all deserving of love, and that, we're all children of God, whomever he or she may be.
Yeah. I feel it very close to me because I had a brother that was gay, and he died in the 80s, and my mother was struggling to save his soul, and that was
Mm,
ended up being very abusive to him.
mm.
So I can empathize a little bit of what you've gone through. Ooh, you have stated that as a queer person of color, you hope to be a source of inspiration for minorities in publishing. The publishing industry is notoriously difficult for
Mhm.
minorities to break into, and you have experienced that yourself. So what advice would you give us Latino writers starting our careers that would help us achieve a modicum of success?
Always be true to yourself and know that there is an audience out there, and it doesn't matter whether you reach them immediately or somewhere down the road, but people can see your authenticity and your honesty, through your work, through your writing, and it's important for us to share our experiences in the world around us, because it's capturing history. If we don't do it, then somebody else might come out, some white person from the Midwest might decide they're going to write the story of this gay Latino who was hanging out at the piers because he was kicked out. And
Mhm.
I didn't want that. We don't want that. We want to be able to share our truths, to speak our truths. And I think I work in publishing. I work with Penguin Random House, and it was very interesting to see the whole emergence of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, so I was there before any of this came about. And, I was always curious, like, how long is this going to last? But it seems to have stuck. And I'm very happy about that. And I think it's opened the door for many others and given them great opportunities. And I hope to see more of that. So um, my advice would be like never to give up, and never, just be true to yourself.
Thank you. That's pretty good. So a lot of your poems are about abandonment by your dad, your mom, siblings, friends, even on the streets. Other social sex workers were not accepting of you. So where did you find acceptance? How does one learn to trust after that kick in the heart?
I was very fortunate to come across some great friends. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the house community, I was very good friends with Willie Ninja, who appeared in a documentary that came out in 1990 called Paris is Burning. And the houses were kind of like fraternities or sororities for queer people, mostly of color, um, that had been abandoned or kicked out, and they sort of created their own families. And what I learned most importantly from there is that your friends are your family. That, family is what you want it to be. It doesn't, always have to be, an immediate like Titi or Tio. It could be someone that you're very close with, that you form a bond and that understands you in that way. And I think that's where I learned that's where my support system came from. And I guess I was lucky that I always had that within myself too, to sort of survive and fight, and you know, even if it was a struggle. But it's understanding that not everyone has that, because I had many friends, like I said, that were lost to drugs, or to sexual diseases or whatever. But um, it's just important to love yourself, to learn, at some point, in spite of what life throws at you, I can't say, you're gonna make lemonade out of, the lemons they give you, but make a pie, do something. Yeah.
Oh, that's very creative. So which is your favorite poem
My own or
of your
from
own? Yeah.
um that's a very difficult question. um I think from this book particularly, Latinx is, because it speaks to so much of what I had been feeling about our culture and how people try to define us and box us And, being able to read that in front of audiences sort of brought me back to, when I started at New Eurekan Poets Cafe, because it was, to me, it was a much stronger poem in that it captured all the political and all the things that I wanted to say, but it also worked on the stage in front of an audience. Because not every poet is a great reader, and that's not necessary, because poetry is a solitary act. We all are on our own when we're writing, but then when you get the opportunity to read it in front of an audience, and I learned that from slam and spoken word poetry, you really want to bring those words to life in a way that the reader can't on their own, just reading it from the book. And so I would have to say, yeah, Latinx is at this point, probably because I'm very close to it.
I always admire people that can do spoken word poetry. I cannot remember anything that I write. I have to read it.
Oh, no, I have to read it these days too. I mean, I have to wear glasses now. I do the large print. I can't memorize it and, slam like I used to back in the day. And I'm not even trying to. I mean, I've accepted that I'm older, and I went through that and I experienced it, and it was great. But, if you're going to bring the words to life, I want them in front of me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you say that everyone has been heartbroken or struggled in some way. And I think, let's see, I think there's a question if there's time for you to read a poem.
Yeah. Is there? If there is, I'd love to. Sure.
Yes, that's all right.
Okay. I'm going to just pull it up. So, and I guess only because I just mentioned it, I'm going to read Latinx's.
All right.
Latinx is something between Latino and Latina, reclaiming how we are defined hombres sitting in front of lit mirrors with a table full of cosmetics, and mujeres with skin fades and ace bandaged down breasts. Something like drag queens a la escuelita and butches a café con leche, like your cool tío that teaches you how to death drop and titi with a mustache. Something like your primo that mysteriously disappeared from the family is never spoken about. Somewhere between when did you come into this country and brown babies in hospital delivery rooms, growing up in a country where we are told to go back to wherever we came from. Somewhere between be oppressed by whitewashed politicians that come from families that look like us and our bodies outlined with white chalk on sidewalks when we are killed, check boxes without nuance. Something between J-Lo and Jenny from the Block, Rita Hayworth from Rita Moreno, migrating across rivers and spending all your money on airfare. Something between Vaporub and Brujeria, appreciating art by Goya and Trump-loving Goya products from Spain. Taco Tuesdays and the waitstaff and cooks at Italian restaurants, children in cages and kids bused to schools, or they're called spics. Teens turning to gangs for brotherhood, sisterhood, and in the hood, maricones getting gay bashed, alcoholism and Corona, tequila, margaritas, mezcal, somewhere between a quinceañera and a sweet 16, celebrating Cinco de Mayo and clutching your purse as brown boys walk by, fetishizing Latin lovers and sex trafficking girls who speak Spanish, getting displaced by gentrification, and they're taking over our neighborhoods. Somewhere between desirable and undesirable, being unwanted no matter what letter closes us out, an O, an A, an X, an E. Somewhere between Vanna White and wanna buy a vowel. Somewhere between your English is so good and speaking Spanglish. Somewhere between the right to live the American dream and being a welfare queen. Somewhere between gracias to the academy and filling up our prisons. Somewhere between el pueblo unido jamás será vencido and we're here, we're queer, get used to it. Somewhere between Dia de los Muertos and painting your face white to symbolize death. Somewhere between you have the right to remain silent and silence equals death. Somewhere between telenovelas and the new One Day at a Time. Somewhere between Richie Valens and Cardi B. Gender fluid like Walter Mercado and Demi Lovato. Somewhere between Lady Bunny's favorite snacks and Bad Bunny. Something like we were here on this land first, and X marks the damn spot.
Wow. Wow. I can see why that's your favorite poem, because it's very powerful and all encompassing. It hits all the right notes.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. So I was saying that you mentioned that everyone has been heartbroken or struggled in some way, and I can really appreciate that, because I also write about my heartbreaks and my struggles, and that understanding of our common humanity is so important, and it helps us appreciate your work and how you and to know that we belong to that community of lovely children that you are trying to form and to support. So I'm really grateful for that, to know that you're out in the world doing what you're doing, is really a pleasure. And I don't know, what else do you want to talk about that we haven't?
No, I mean, I think to that point, thank you so much for bringing it up. I think I had that sort of what you mentioned before, the imposter syndrome, because I was like, I'm getting accolades and I have success, but like, I didn't have the opportunity to get a formal education or go for an MFA or, but I think, like, the important thing about being an artist, about any artist, whether you're a writer or a dancer, is that, we're somehow emotionally crippled. We have something that we want to say in that sense. And, you don't have to be an expert. Sometimes it just comes from within. It comes from your heart. It comes from your soul. And that's the most important, to have that and to have passion are the most important key things to any art, whatever it may be, whether you're creating a sculpture or, a dance or writing a poem,
Yeah. I was just reading a little while ago an article about forgiveness and how these days the importance of family is not as strong, and more people are saying that you should not forgive. Have you forgiven your father and your mother, and how?
My mom and I have a complex relationship, but we're good. We're good. My father, I've never met. I only found out a few years ago where he lives in Florida and his name, and I sort of got the whole, and that's what this book is a lot about. So I grew up because a cousin of mine had told me that, believing that my father was actually Puerto Rican. That was an essential key part of who I was and what I was writing about, only to find out a couple of years ago that he was also Ecuadorian, and that the reason that he abandoned me and my mom is because he had been engaged to a Cuban woman and they went off to Florida and had children. And so I attempted to reach out to my half siblings, and they want nothing to do with me, perhaps because I'm gay, or, we just never really had a relationship. There's no real reason for us to have that sort of relationship. So I wouldn't say I've forgiven as much as I've moved past that, just how to accept that, this is who I am and this is who they are. And, we don't have to have that sort of relationship. But, as I said before, you build your own family. You're close to the people that love and respect you and appreciate you. And that's what really matters in the end.
Yeah. Having an open heart to love and accept people the way they are, that is really very healthy and healing. So thank you so much for your presence here, for your work, and please continue doing the great work that you've been doing so far.
Mil gracias for having me be part of this. And thank you so much, Las Comadres, for everything you guys do.
Wow. Our thanks. Oh, kind of having a hard time keeping my act together here because both of your stories, they have reached into my heart and both squeezed it hard and also caressed it. And the interviews, ladies, you all were outstanding. Absolutely fabulous questions to draw out such powerful responses. Our thanks to you and your publisher, Echo Press, an imprint of HarperCollins, and Queer Mojo, a Rebel Satori Print, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you very much, really, to Comadre Laura Esparza and Emilia Diepa. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight. And to those who submitted questions, we'd like to thank all our volunteers, those who submitted questions. And we also want to thank our volunteers, without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. And please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, and others. And there is an example of how to do that on our Latino Lit website. And if you don't know how to do it, but you want to, well, there's some suggestions there to help you get started, because those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as other readers. Buy books to support our authors. And if your library doesn't have one, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Let's keep growing. Let's bring a friend or two or five. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our August 2024 books are The Litany of Saints by Diana Riojas and The Things We Don't Know by Elba Iris Perez. Again, thank you for all your continued support of our book club and of Latino literature. And please join us in celebrating our Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night, and always read Latino Lit.